Welcome, Ahmed. We have a good showing of Yemeni professionals, which of course makes me very pleased. So,
Thank you so much for having me here. I will be a listener here. I'm sorry for not participating.
I'm glad to have you.
Thank you.
Okay, so welcome. I'm going to pause my music now. So thanks for tuning in. And as I said before, the song is a special one because it talks about the immigrants who are leaving Yemen or going elsewhere. And so it is an issue that we still face, even though the song is pretty old. So just to start, my name is Neda Saleh. I will be moderating today's call. I'm the coordinator at Action Corps and moderating today because Dr. Aisha will actually be joining us as a panelist because Shuaib, one of our Yemeni journalists, is actually under the weather. So thank you for tuning in. Thanks for your patience with the change in events. So as coordinator of Action Corps, I do work to advocate for humanitarian policy, US policy that saves lives around the world. Our goal is to end suffering for people all over the world, including Yemen. Yemen is one of our focus points. So happy to be here as a Yemeni American as well. I was born in Yemen. And so we'll be hearing from two other Yemeni professionals, and we have Dr. Aisha, who many of you already know, and also Sumaya Ali Raja, who is joining us from, I believe, Yemen. Is that correct?
But I'll be going to Yemen in a couple of weeks.
Okay.
Sumaya is in Paris.
Okay, good to know. All right. So thank you so much for joining us today. There has been a lot of conversation about Yemen, my home country, and a lot of these conversations tend to exclude Yemenis. And so we're trying to include as many Yemeni voices as possible. All the people speaking on the call today are Yemeni, and it's just a really, really powerful moment. And especially now, as we have seen the recent letter by Representative Kana and Tlaib in support of the peace talks. This call today is in part following up on that. And we also have seen some great energy in the spring with peace talks. We've seen the Saudi-Iran peace talks and then the Riyadh-Sana'a peace talks. So we'd like to build on that energy. And so a huge thank you to our co-sponsors today and our co-organizers from Yemen Relief and Reconstruction Foundation, Dr. Aisha's organization, who has done amazing work in Yemen on the ground, 100% volunteer-based and run. And they co-led this effort. And then I'd also like to thank Dawn, Middle East, and FCNL, and Just Foreign Policy, MADRE, Peace Action, Quincy Institute, and the rest of our allies who join us monthly to talk about Yemen, and as well as you who have made time today to hear about the conflict in Yemen and advocate. So thanks for being here. Just a quick overview of the program. We'll be first hearing a short presentation from Dr. Aisha Juman, and then we will open up for questions for both Dr. Aisha, Sumaya, and the other professionals on this call. So to start, I'd like to first introduce Dr. Aisha Juman, who is the founder and president of Yemen Relief and Reconstruction Foundation. And she's done amazing work. She has over 30 years of experience in public health, and her work has helped with viral vaccine and cervical and breast cancer research, surveillance, maternal, child, and health medicine and healthcare. And she's also the founder of Yemen Relief and Reconstruction Foundation, which is my go-to organization if I'm going to do any charity for Yemen because of the fact they're volunteer-based. I actually volunteered with them. It's a really good organization having a base in Yemen and sourcing their material from inside the country. And so it's helping stimulate the economy and it's helping the Yemeni people. So thank you, Dr. Aisha, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Neda. I'm delighted to be with everyone. Shuaib, unfortunately, was not able to join us. He had an emergency procedure yesterday. And okay, so can I share? It's saying that starting share screen will stop other participants' computer sound share.
That's okay, you can do it.
Perfect. So Shuaib had to have a procedure, and he still felt so dedicated to this that he was willing to go ahead and come on, but unfortunately, once the effect of the anesthesia was gone, he realized this is more than he can do. So this morning around 6 a.m., he told me he's not able to join. So I'm filling in for him, and I want now to just give a brief overview of what's going on in Yemen, and then we'll go to the Q&A with our guest speakers. I always start my presentations with a view of Sana'a. This is the oldest continuously inhabited city in the world. And just to make sure that people understand that Yemen is such a beautiful country with a very rich history. Our history extends to more than 5,000 years. So that just to dispel a lot of the negativity that we hear about Yemen all the time. So this is just a brief overview of the humanitarian crisis. According to the UN, out of the 32 million people in Yemen, there are 21.6 million who are in need, and 13.4 are in acute need. If we look at the food security in Yemen, we see that all of Yemen, regardless of whether it's in the south or in the north, is experiencing food insecurity, and the red means that many people in those regions, if not provided with emergency food, many of them will actually die. But every part of Yemen is experiencing food insecurity. If we look at the health aspect in Yemen as well, we see the same crises where 20.3 million people in Yemen are requiring health services and they don't get it. And then 35% of those have severe needs, and 58% have extreme needs for health services. Okay. So if we look at the nutrition aspect of Yemen, again, we have 11.9, almost 12 million people who are in need, 45% of those severe and 25% extreme need of nutritional support. This is from UNICEF. Yemen is a living hell for all children. And this is something that has been accurate since 2015. I'll talk briefly about the blockade because there is a lot of discussion about whether there is a blockade on Yemen or not. This is a recent data from April of this month from UNIVAM. And it's showing the containers coming to Hodeidah port. And before the blockade on Yemen, there were over 300,000 containers arriving to Hodeidah. Of course, after the war and the blockade, it was reduced in 2016 to 40,000, 2017, 20,000, and then that just really flattened. In 2023, we have only 855 containers. So what is the importance of containers? This is where all the medicine comes in. This is where all the medical equipments come in. So the containers are the lifeline, other than food and fuel, that comes to Yemen. And we've seen a dismal number of containers allowed into Yemen since 2018. This is again from UNIVAM, and this looks at the monthly quantities being discharged or coming into Yemen from April last year, when the first truce occurred between the Saudis and the government in Sana'a, until April of this year. So the red one is the food, the blue is the food, the red is the fuel, and other cargo is the yellow. And Yemen needs about 500 metric tons of food per month. So except for November, most of the months we are seeing a lot less than what Yemen needs, but that's quite an improvement from the years before. Fuel, Yemen needs about 400,000 metric tons of fuels per month. And we can see most of the months that is a lot less than what Yemen needs. I have seen an improvement in cargo. Cargo was zero for a very long time. And that is starting February of this year. We've seen a better improvement in the cargo getting into Yemen. This is again showing the food import into Yemen from 2016, when UNIVAM started inspection. until 2022. And as I said, most of the time, it's about 50% of what Yemen needs in food. Fuel is another issue. It's actually about a quarter of what Yemen needs most of the year since 2016, 2021. It was very few fuel was allowed into the country. However, we've seen an improvement to about 50% of what Yemen needs after the truce was implemented. I wanted to show you the containers or the other cargo that comes in. So we have bulk carriers. This may have rice or sugar, and we have tankers that will have fuel, and we have general cargo. But if we look at the container ships, we're still are at a very low number. This is about 4,000 containers were allowed to come into Yemen. That is, again, if you compare that to the 300,000 that used to come to Yemen, that is very little coming into Yemen. So whether you call it a blockade, you call it a restriction, the impact is what I'm looking at as a public health professional, and the impact is severe. This is another slide, again, showing, fuel ships that are discharged, cleared en route. We have 3 vessels that are cleared and en route. We have 13 vessels that are waiting to get in, and we have 9 vessels that are currently discharging. This is a joke. If we talk about a port that is importing about 80% of what Yemen needs, and we're talking about 3 and 13 number of vessels getting into the port. These should be in the thousands and tens of thousands, not in 13 or 3 or 9. So this is just to show that the blockade is still in place. And I don't care whether you call it a restriction or you call it a blockade, the impact on the Yemeni people is what I look at. In terms of the truce negotiation, in April of last year, the UN welcomes an announcement of a 2-month truce in Yemen. These were the terms of the truce, facilitating an entry of 18 fuel ships into the port of Hodeidah. Imagine that. That's the terms of the truce, allowing 18 ships of fuel getting into Hodeidah, and then allowing 2 commercial flights a week to and from Sana'a airport. So for those who insist there is no blockade in Yemen, the terms of the truce should tell us what's going on in Yemen. More recently, Houthi officials, met with the Saudis in Sana'a. We were all very happy with that because this war needs to end. And we were very excited about that. This was in April, and since then, no progress has been made. So since extending the truce, there are 2 demands from the Houthis. One is the coalition pays salaries for all state employees, including the military, from Yemen's oil and gas revenues based on employment list of 2014. And that is before the Houthis went into Yemen, and then open all airports and ports under Houthis control. So these are the terms, these are demands of the peace negotiations. So anybody who's saying there is nothing and everything is open really need to realize that they are not in Yemen and they're not being affected, because I know I am affected by that. This is from this morning. This is the director of Yemeni flights in Sana'a. He is announcing that there are, starting Saturday, June 10th, 6 flights a week to Jordan from Sana'a airport are going to take place. So instead of the 3 that were happening, now it's 6. And the reason for that is now the Eid, which is the next major holidays, and the summer, when I was trying to get a ticket, I've been trying to get a ticket to Sana'a the last 2 months because I want to go and visit my family and check our work in Yemen. I was told by Yemeni in Jordan that there are no flights available until the end of July. So luckily, hopefully with this new opening of 3 more flights, I will be able to get tickets to go. Another also personal experience is that my brother, when he went out on a business trip outside Yemen before Ramadan, he was out for a month. And when he tried to get back to Yemen, he actually was stuck in Jordan for 2 months because he couldn't get a ticket because it was Ramadan. By the time he got to Yemen, It was the third week of Ramadan, which is a huge deal for someone not spending Ramadan in Yemen. So I'll stop here and thank you for listening, and we'll move on to Neda.
Thanks a ton, Dr. Aisha, for all that information. If there are further questions, you can leave them in the chat and hopefully we'll get to them. So I want to now open up the floor for the questions we received prior to the call today. And answering these questions will be Dr. Aisha as well as Sumaya Ali Raja, who I'd like to introduce now. Sumaya is the Yemeni journalist and political activist who was the first woman to announce herself for the presidential candidacy in Yemen in 2005. And so she grew up in Taiz, and at age 14, she studied in North Carolina High School, then went to study political science in Southwest Missouri State. And then she studied at the University of Kansas. So she was among the first Yemeni newscasters, her and her sisters, in the 1970s. She later lived in England doing consultancy work for the BBC and Channel 4, and then she lived in France. And after 9/11, she created and ran a Yemeni-French forum to help explain Yemen to French policymakers. She announced her candidacy at an Arab Women's Conference from Words to Actions held in Sana'a in December 2005, and in January 2007, she announced her intention to establish a liberal political party, Al-Bishra Party, to achieve equality between men and women, preserve heritage, and enhance the rights of children. And so welcome, Sumaya. We're delighted to have you here. Welcome again, Dr. Aisha. And also we'll be having some professionals speak as well, like Dr. Shireen, if there are questions, and others on this call. So the first question that I will be asking is, just to start us off, can we speak a bit about what has been the response of the Yemeni population to the Saudi ambassador visit to Yemen in March 2023 regarding the potential peace deal with the Sana'a government? And Dr. Aisha, if you'd like to take a swing, it's an important question.
Yeah, so as I said, when the Saudi ambassador was Sana'a, there was a lot of celebration, actually. The population was very pleased. Everybody thought there's an end to the suffering and an end in sight to the war, and the risk of continued bombing in Yemen. So, everybody was extremely elated and very happy with that. So it is quite a disappointment for many people today that nothing has happened, because when the Saudi ambassador left Yemen, the idea was that he was going to go back immediately after Ramadan and continue the discussion on the peace deal. And that hasn't happened. So I do want here to ask Sumaya about her experience in Yemen, because Sumaya was in Yemen when the bombing started. So I would like her to share with us her experience, and also how she was able to leave Yemen, and under what circumstances and the issues that she faced. Sumaya?
Yes, thank you, Aisha. Thank you, Nida. I basically, I'm a diabetic. And so when the bombing was happening, it was always, am I going to have enough insulin to survive? So basically, my sister and I were living or spending most of our time in a reinforced music room so that the bombs wouldn't hit our head. But as the bombs became more and more progressive, we felt like we were going to die. So she and I just packed up very lightly, and we found a Saudi bus that would take us to the Saudi border so we can at least take flights from there. And that trip usually takes 3 hours, and this trip took 14 hours because of all the stops along the way. And while I'm fortunate to get out, I really miss Yemen. I was born in Yemen. I've lived in Yemen most of my life. And I just love living in Yemen. I love the people. I like the way we help each other out. Even when people have nothing, they help each other out. It is really an experience that I haven't seen in any other country. And it's just, it's just also a beautiful country, which makes it, and the weather is spectacular. So you can, you have a combination of everything. And now we want the bombs to stop and the blockade to not exist so that we can have a normal life again.
Thank you, Sumaya, for that. Could you actually speak more on the blockade while we have you and its effects from your experience?
Yes, the blockade. Well, basically, as Aisha has explained, no ships coming to Hodeidah were really allowed to put their products, the fuel, the medicines, the food, and of course, the blockade claimed that Iran was sending a lot of military equipment to Yemen, and so they would blockade any ship that had anything to do with Iran. So Iran was using a lot of non-Irani ships to deliver whatever medicine and food to Yemen. I think Yemen has enough weapons. I don't think we need any more weapons from Iran. The country is flooded with weapons. You can say after the United States, Yemen is probably the second country with all the weapons in the world. So yes, the blockade, people died, people got very ill, people starved, and in a country which is already living on the edge, the blockade made life totally impossible.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. Dr. Asha, do you want to speak about how the blockade has, what are the current restrictions on people's freedoms and freedom of movement for Yemenis?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to start with the airport. The Sana'a airport used to have 50 flights a day, which is by American standard is not a lot. But for Yemeni, that was sufficient for us to go in and out unhindered. Right now, we have, first of all, it was closed from 2015. Any flights getting out of Sana'a had to stop in Saudi Arabia for inspection. And I was on one of those flights. And so I've been going to Yemen every year since the war started, because nobody is going to prevent me from going to my home country. So, but before I can go, I have to submit my passport to the Saudi-led coalition to get approval to travel to my hometown and to my home country. And so you had to stop by Saudi Arabia for inspection. They would purposefully delay the flight from taking off. So you'll sometimes be in a tarmac in Saudi Arabia from 6 hours to 14 hours. Many people lost their connecting flights, including one of my other brothers who was on a flight and he had a connecting flight and he lost his connecting flight and lost a ticket, and he had to buy another ticket to fly out of Jordan because he flew to Jordan. Currently, again, finding tickets to Yemen is extreme, especially to Sana'a, is very difficult. We then were able to travel to Aden, and then you have another 16-hour drive from Aden to Sana'a. And during the rainy season, forget about it, because the floods, because like Sumaya said, all the bridges were destroyed. So what you have now is to drive in unpaved roads and mostly waterways. And when it's flooded, you just have to wait, no matter how long, until you're able to go through. And so that's one part of how that is affecting us. The other part is I've been trying to get leukemia medications to Yemen for over 3 years now, and I'm not able to. No company is able to support us of shipping that leukemia medicine to Yemen because of the blockade. And I don't, again, whether it's restriction or blockade, the impact for me is I'm not able to get leukemia medicine, although it was donated and it will treat every single Yemeni with leukemia throughout the country for a whole year. We're not able to do that. However, in November, when I was in Yemen of last year, there were 20 Yemeni kids who died of leukemia medicine that was smuggled into Yemen and it was infected. right now, the Ministry of Health in Sana'a is trying to get leukemia medicine that's donated from the country of Oman, and they have not been able to get that into the country either. So again, these are the day-to-day issues that we have to deal with as Yemeni to have access to our own country. And we're not able to. So that's what is happening to the local population in Yemen. And I'm going to share another painful story for me. And when my sister had recurring cancer, we could not fly her out of Sana'a because Sana'a, airport was totally closed. And to take someone who is sick 16 hours to Aden and then fly her out from Aden to Jordan, and because she was being treated at the American University of Beirut, and then to Beirut, we couldn't do that. When I tried to get her medicine, and here is someone as connected as I am, with the World Health Organization, with everybody, I was able to buy the medicine from Egypt, and then to try to get it to Yemen, it had the WHO friend had to take it to Djibouti, and then from Djibouti to Sana'a. But by the time it got there, my sister didn't need it anymore. And so, we're talking about someone who's well-connected, has the means, but I'm not representative of the millions of Yemeni who can't even have a meal a day. So imagine the impact on those millions. If I'm struggling with all my privileges, how is an average Yemeni experiencing this? So I want people to recognize that. Thank you.
That tears my heart, Dr. Aisha. Thank you for sharing. So we've talked about these personal experiences. Before we move on, Sumaya, would you like to speak about any other personal experiences you had in Yemen and your work as an activist?
Well, when I raised my hand and said I wanted to be president, I really couldn't care less about the position. I did it because Saleh had been in power for 30 years. And the question that everybody came to me and said, you mean I can be president? I said, of course, everybody should be president, except for Saleh. He's been around for too long. He broke the country. He basically stole all the money, and he and his family, and did nothing. So I'm so glad that was broken, the idea that only Saleh can be a ruler, or only men can be rulers, or whoever. And my experience, I have to say, even with the Houthis, I'm a woman who goes around in Sana'a without anything on my hair, and I drive a car, and they just allow me to go through. They're so happy to see, because there are not so many women. And so I have not had personally bad experiences with the Houthis. But then again, unlike Aisha, I haven't had to help someone get medicine, or yes, I mean, whatever help I could give some monetary help to people, but really, other than that, you can't do much. Because
Sumaya, as we were discussing right before this call started, you mentioned something that I thought was really interesting. We have a question about it as well. Do you think that the US can be an impartial and credible mediator for peace negotiations?
I'm sorry, no. I think we have more hope with China specifically, but and Russia, because how can the US be impartial when they were helping Saudi Arabia bomb Yemen for since 2015? So maybe they have changed their attitude now, but we have to see some positive steps from them, like help us lift the blockade from Saudi Arabia. We have to see some effort, Yeah,
and we've seen reports that the Sana'a press has been saying that the US has been derailing peace talks between Riyadh and Sana'a Dr. Asha, do you want to speak on that a bit? What are your thoughts about that?
Sumaya, do you want to take that first and I will go second?
I'm sorry, what was the question again?
We've heard from Sanaa Press that there has been reports that the US is derailing peace talks, the peace talks that you were just talking about with China.
Yes, they want to be included, which is wonderful. But of course, so they have been saying, what can China do to the Middle East, you know? But they have been in the Middle East now for 3 decades, the United States. And basically, China came in for 3 months and did a peace treaty with the Saudis and the Houthis. So this gives us a lot of hope and emphasis. It would be wonderful if the United States would participate in pushing the Saudis. They have had a great relationship with the Saudis. So get them to commit to lifting this blockade and help us out. Now, I don't really believe, the Saudis keep saying we are going to give Yemen 650 million or whatever. We haven't seen any money. You know, all the banks are closed. There is literally no money except that is obtained through personal people, like Aisha explained. You give money to somebody to give to somewhere. It's really, and that is what is causing Yemen's poverty more than anything else, because Yemen relies on its population that lives abroad to live, because most families have somebody or many people in their family who live abroad who send money in. So these are the most important things for the US to concentrate if they'd really like to be part of this peace initiative. Get the Saudis to lift the blockade, get them to really do what they say, not just take pictures and go away.
Yeah, actually, and unfortunately, what we're hearing from the Sanaa press, but also even some US press and other international press, the US is derailing the peace process in Yemen. So once the Houthi and the Saudi met, what we're hearing is the US then dispatched Linder King, McGurk, and a long list of people, including now Secretary Blinken, to Saudi Arabia. And they are telling the Saudis, we'll do whatever you want. And they're also pushing for not allowing the terms of the extension, longer extension of the truce, which is, paying the salaries and, lifting all the restrictions of the blockade on the Yemeni ports. So at this point in time, which is really a very, it hurts for me being a Yemeni American, is that the Saudis are willing to do more and the Americans are the ones who are saying, no, you can't do that. So we've been, as advocates, asking the US government to be pushing the Saudis to lift the blockade, pushing the US government to stop, supporting them with the weapons. And now what we're seeing is the US coming and saying, put the brake on the peace negotiation, ensuring that, all the Yemeni employees that have not been paid salaries since 2016 continue to struggle for food, for medicine for their kids. So these are the, it's just so incomprehensible to me that the US now is actually the one that is preventing a peace process from moving forward in Yemen. And here I'd like to invite anybody, and especially Shireen, if she wants to contribute to this discussion as well. Or Ahmed, if you also want to contribute.
Yeah, thanks for that. And thank you for your input and for organizing this. I think it's really important to understand the role of the US here, and people can read about these efforts to derail the peace process in the Pentagon Papers leaks that occurred about a month or so ago. there has to be a way for the US to think of itself that this was all worthwhile, right? So think about the money that was spent, especially by Saudi Arabia. By some estimates, $200 million a day was spent in Yemen over the last several years. And so they are very much incentivized to leave this war and to save face while doing so. But why was the US helping them? And there's nothing to show for it. They have not been able to take territory from the Houthis since July of 2015. So it's been basically a stalemate on these fronts. They still control, the Houthis control, you know, an area where 70% or 80% of the Yemeni population lives. And so for the Saudis to exit this war empty-handed is very embarrassing. And it's embarrassing for the US to have supported them throughout these years. And at the end of the day, you have the very same people that they were trying to oust now in power, and now actually even more in power than they were before, because the Yemeni population has seen them as some sort of like savior who stayed and defended the country in their views, right? And so there's incentive to derail, to try to get something out of, to extract some kind of deal that would work for the US. We have to remember that Yemen is at a strategic location controlling Bab el-Mandeb Strait. And so they don't want the Houthis in control of this area that could potentially cause disruption to 10 to 15% of world shipment. Now, the Houthis have not threatened that, but they do have the power to potentially cause, you know, harm in that region if things don't go their way or if the war continues to prolong. And so for the Saudis to finally want to talk, it's because they've frankly lost. And for the US to want to derail this, I think it has to do with, well, you know, what did we get out of it? Why were we supporting them for so long? And there's nothing to show for it at the end of the day.
And here, Anida, I also want to add one thing with the Saudi Houthi negotiations. One of the things they didn't agree on has to do with the Saudis wanting to be mediators. So like many people don't think the US can be an honest mediator. The Saudis now wanted to consider themselves a mediator between the Houthis and the government in Riyadh, which is a joke because this is called a Saudi-led coalition war. And the reason they want to do that is because they don't want to pay for reparation for the damage they caused in the many years of this war. And that is something that is contentious in the negotiation. Sumaya, do you have something to add? I saw you smile when I mentioned mediator.
Yes, the Saudis being the mediators, that's just out of the question, you know, because basically, I think the problem with the United States is they stopped giving the United States all that money they used to give. And this is one of the contentious points. Maybe that's why the US wants to mediate to get some money out of the deal. But that's about it. That's all I can add.
Thanks for sharing. And yes, that's right on the dot, Aisha. And that was one of our next questions, and you phrased it perfectly. How can a warring party be a mediator in the peace talks? And I also want to ask, what role, if any, can traditional Yemeni peace talks contribute to fostering peace, or Yemeni mediations contribute to fostering peace in Yemen? How about Sumaya, you want to take this one?
Well, there is the Islah Party, which is still a very viable party, but they should be included in the peace initiatives. So should some prominent Hadramis. You know, there are a lot, there's about 100 that I know of Hadrami families in Saudi Arabia who are multi-millionaires or maybe even billionaires. And I think they should be included to help Hadramaut, you know, to, I think they would like to be included and have a say in what's happening, because they've seen how Saudi Arabia has treated Yemen, and I don't think they feel good about that. And who else? Well, there are several parties, but they're not that major. You know, I just mentioned Islah and the Hadarim because they have enough people to back them up. And but definitely they're not really including any women right now. And that's why I want to get back to Yemen to fight for that, saying we are here, we're half the population, include us, you know, don't treat us like we don't live here. Thank you.
Yeah, I also want to add to that. Yemeni tribal system has existed for thousands of years, and so every time the tribal mediation takes root or it starts, it actually ends in a resolution of a conflict. And we've seen that actually very successfully in the release of two very important prisoners who were with the Houthis, and that is Rajab and Asbahi. Both are very prominent. Both, one was the Minister of Defense before the war, and they were released based on tribal negotiations. So tribes from the south of Yemen went to the north, and as they passed different areas in Yemen, more Yemeni tribes joined them. So by the time they reached Sana'a, now we had tribes from both the south and the north reaching out to the government of Sana'a and asking for the release of these two very prominent prisoners. And guess what? They both were released based on tribal mediation. Anytime there is prisoner exchange and that mediation occurs in Yemen without the international community meddling in, they actually succeed. So every time there is something between Yemeni and Yemeni, those are very successful. It's only when we get the meddling, whether it's from the US, whether it's from Iran, whether it's from Saudi Arabia, even from the UN, unfortunately, then we get more complications. But Yemeni to Yemeni, we've seen very many successful negotiations. And actually, there was an instance in MADRE, Sumaya, I know you'll be happy with this, where women negotiated the release of prisoners. And they were honored, and because they asked for that, the prisoners were released. And I agree 100% that we have to have women participation, because women had really suffered the most from this war, because they had to deal with the aftermath of many young men dying in the war, taking care of the families, providing food for the families. So the women had suffered the most, and they need to be, I think, at the front of a lot of these negotiations.
MADRE, because I went personally by myself to MADRE, and I fell in love with it. The people were so welcoming and kind, and they didn't think it odd that I'm a woman alone. They never said, why are you here as a woman alone? They just, they are, but I add to that, even in the family where I had lunch, two men went out and one of them killed the other. This is just a horrible aspect of non-negotiation. This is what I call non-negotiation. And since people carry all those weapons, and it's a spur of the moment thing. And if we can get more women as mediators, we can help with these situations in which men kill each other on the spot.
Yeah, I just want to have a trivia thing here. Marib is where the Queen of Sheba throne was. So this is a culture that was ruled by women for many years.
And as we have all women here on this panel speaking, and I just want to honor the fact that Yemen is a Muslim majority country, and in our faith, we believe that heaven lies beneath a woman's feet. So the woman is the mother here, question. So men have this, Yemen is maybe seen in the media as oppressive of women. That may be true in some aspects, but we do believe that there's a special honor for women. And I think that's why the MADRE mediations were successful.
I just want to add here, I know you all know this, but for our other listeners, is that the Queen of Sheba is mentioned in the Quran as being a just queen, and that she would ask her counsel, what should I do in this situation? So it was always they showed how she was a just queen by asking her people what to do in certain situations. And this is something we don't see anymore. We need to have shura, shura, to decide collectively, not individually as a ruler. Thank you.
Very true. So moving on, moving back to the war and peace talks, I want to ask what positive consequences would we see in Yemen if peace is attained? And then on the contrary, what negative consequences would we see if peace is not attained? Probably in the near future. So how about we ask Dr. Aisha?
Yeah, and I also invite Sumaya to also add in to that, because we were talking earlier and she had a lot of thoughts on this. In terms of if peace occurs, I mean, this is really a reprieve that the 30+ million people in Yemen need. Every time we think there is a light at the end of the tunnel, somehow it gets blocked, and so people are ready for this. And I would say not just ordinary people, I think even fighters. I think those who are fighting, the Yemeni and even Saudi Arabia, everybody is tired. They need to, close this and, start building. Yemen needs a lot of work to be done, but unless we officially, close this war and we have a negotiation between all the Yemeni parties that are party to this war, this is something that's going to be extremely important to the stability of Yemen. Yemen has a great potential to be a wonderful country, a country that contributes to the world. It has very resilient people. I'll ask the audience here, how many of you will continue to go to the work if you're not paid salaries for 6 years? The Yemeni people still go to the work having not been paid salaries since 2016. They are very, they're problem solving. I was taking a taxi in Sana'a, and then he stopped and I said, what's going on? He said, I don't have any more fuel. I said, what's next? He said, oh, I'm going to change it to use gas. So he's changed the car engine that it can run both on gas, on fuel. And guess the gas where it's coming from? It's from the gas bottles that we use here for our barbecue. So, yeah, I mean, to have people who do this, who, when the Saudi prevented, solar panels, after destroying all the electricity in Yemen, people started using solar panels. So the Saudis stopped, put the list, solar panel on the list of things not to get into Yemen. And this is through Aden, not even through Hodeidah. They started making their own solar panels. I saw somebody who was boiling water using a kettle through a solar panel that they made locally. So these are people who can actually contribute, not just to the Yemen, but to the region and to the world. And we need to support them do that. If Yemen does not see peace, and the Houthis have been very, strong more recently, that if our ports are going to be closed, all ports in the region are going to be closed. So they have threatened to close the Saudi and Emirati ports, which will just really blow up the whole region. Again, people talk about, hopelessness, and the hopelessness leads to people doing a lot of stupid things. And so if we have a lot of young people who see no future for themselves, many of them will be radicalized. And that's also, something that impacts the whole world, not just Yemen. So these are the issues that we need to consider. And it is a lot easier and a lot better for Yemen and for the world if this ends and a peace process that is fair and just and inclusive does take place. And I also just want to clarify here is when we talk about an inclusive peace process, it's going to be in a stepwise fashion. It's not going to all happen at once. So that's why we're happy with Saudi and Houthi negotiations, because that's the first step. These are the people who have arms. These are the people who are fighting each other. So once that, is resolved, then you start bringing other groups to the table. We're not going to be able to bring everybody to the table and expect to have a resolution. that's not how the peace process in Yemen is going to happen. It has to be stepwise. And I will leave it to Sumaya from here.
Thank you, Aisha. One thing I wanted to point out is that the Houthis are getting younger and younger. As you can see, they've lost a lot of their men. So I see all the young soldiers while I'm there, they're all like 14, 15. And that is so sad. And that is horrible to have such young men ready to lose their lives again. And so for this reason, as Aisha said, I think the Houthis and everybody's willing to make peace, because also I have to admit that the Saudis many Saudis do not fight. They're too busy starting businesses. Who fights for Saudi Arabia? The poor Sudanese that they pay for. And at one point, a lot of Yemeni people, they were paying a lot of Yemeni people who lived in Saudi Arabia to fight against Yemen. And that is so tragic, because anyway, this is why peace must come, because we really cannot afford to lose so many people all the time.
Can I ask Shireen if she wants to say something here?
Yeah, I'm looking at Paul Shannon's question in the chat. Maybe I can take that. So the question is, what's our demand of Congress and what's our demand of President Biden? And for years and years and years, I've been saying the demand is stop bombing Yemen, stop supporting the Saudis in their blockade of Yemen. Right now, it's the big ask would be stop getting in the way of negotiations. Continue if you really want to be seen as a mediator. I mean, nobody really legitimately sees them as a mediator, like Sumaya mentioned earlier. These are arsonists who want to pretend to be firefighters, essentially. But if they want anybody in the international community to take them seriously, to not derail the peace process, to make motions, at least some kind of effort to show that this is all in good faith, that they are invested in lifting the blockade and not saying, well, there's no blockade, let's call it restriction and not a blockade. People are suffering, people are dying. A country that needs to seek permission from a foreigner to run, flights in and out of its country is under occupation. This is under occupation. They're under blockade. And so for the US to play, these semantic games, essentially calling it defensive rather than offensive, and restrictions versus blockade, and maximalist demands when the Houthis are demanding that people who haven't been paid since 2016 be paid. These are all efforts to derail the process. So I would say that just stop getting in the way, and if you want to be taken seriously at all, actually work with these parties toward a solution. And of course, ultimately, and I'm going to speak for myself here, as a US citizen, we should be demanding accountability and reparations for the Yemeni people. You don't just get to join a war for 6, 7 years, 8 years, and then walk away, and saying, oops, go solve it by yourselves. You've destroyed an entire country. You've destroyed youth's future, essentially. This is not just going to end when the bombing stops or when the blockade is lifted. And so we need to be looking for accountability and reparations, and not just charity. And the very basic is to stop and to get out of the way, but we should be continuing to demand justice for the Yemeni people from our governments who played such a major role in fueling this war for so long.
Absolutely. Thank you, Shireen, for those powerful closing words, because as we approach the last couple of minutes of this call, it is important to focus on why we're here and what can be done as US citizens. So I know there's a lot of staffers here, there's members, Congress staffers who are here to listen and learn more, and also activists. So that's our ask, is to stop slow walking diplomacy and peace talks, which are happening. So as we end here, can we have any final words from our speakers? Sumaya, if you'd like to start, and then we'll pass it to Dr. Aisha.
Thank you. I think the point that my colleague Shireen made is so important. It has to start with the American people and their leaders to really help us out. And this is a very, very strong point that I have seemed to have forgotten about. And really, we must ask the US if you want to be involved, please do financially. We and that would be the best way to go. And of course, you all have congressmen and congresswomen, and I think absolutely that is the first step in helping with reparations. Thank you so much, Shireen.
Thank you, Sumaya. Thank you for being here. Dr. Aisha, would you like to give us some closing words?
Yeah, I just want to say to people who say there is no blockade in Yemen, to wish for that, whatever is happening to Yemen, on them and their families. That's all I want for them. If they can wish that for that to happen to them and their families, then there is no blockade on Yemen. You know, the suffering, we've been saying this for, you know, I've been talking about this for 8 years now, getting into the 9th year. And I'm really tired of having to explain the suffering and have people who know fairly well what the situation is go on semantics without taking into account the impact on the Yemeni people. So I also want to thank all the people who've supported Yemen for this marathon. It's a marathon. It's over 8 years. Without them, none of this would have happened in terms of making the US government accountable and making them make decisions they don't want to make. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all of you who contributed today. If you would like to contact Aisha, her email is aisha@yemenfoundation.org. Sumaya, it would be great if you could put your contact information in the chat for anybody who wants to follow up with you. And Shireen as well, you can put your contact information in the chat. So thank you all for joining us today. Hopefully we'll see you on the next one.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Neda. Bye-bye.
Nita,
Yes.
will the slides be available? Somebody suggested that in the chat.
Yeah, Dr. Aisha will